Ronald Reagan, 40th President of the United States, remembered by many for his charismatic personality, his communication skills, his sense of humor, his leadership, and his optimism. Clearly, that's what made him president in 1980, right? Well, partially. What if I told you that what really got him elected was air conditioning? Crazy, right? Well, let me explain. Put yourself in Reagan's shoes. After not being able to secure the Republican nomination during the presidential elections in 1968 and 1976, Reagan was determined to come up with a winning strategy for his third run. At the heart of any election are the questions, what do you stand for and which voters do your politics resonate with so you can convince them to vote for you? For Reagan, the picture was clear. He stood for conservative values, especially he campaigned on social issues like law and order, traditional family values, and his opposition to abortion. He envisioned a smaller federal government while elevating the rights of states. For the economy, he supported deregulation and tax cuts. At the same time, he promised a strong military and national defense given the ongoing threat from the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Where would political candidates find voters in agreement with such messaging today? You guessed it, in the southern states. Likewise, Reagan used the Southern strategy. Specifically, his campaign focused on building a coalition in the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt is the region in the United States that stretches across the southern and southwestern portions of the country from Florida to California. But why would a Republican presidential candidate even need to spend a lot of time campaigning in states where most people would vote for him or her anyway? After all, the American Electoral College system in most states guarantees the candidate with a simple majority all the Electoral College votes of the state. For example, if you are a Republican presidential candidate in, let's say, 2024, you wouldn't be likely spending a whole lot of time campaigning in Texas. Your win there is almost guaranteed. You would focus your limited time and resources on the so-called battleground states, trying to sway undecided voters in your favor. Well, unlike many of us today, Reagan knew that the South had traditionally been a Democratic stronghold. Wait, what? Yeah, and tides had only started to shift for a short while toward the Republican Party when he started his 1980 presidential run. Reagan, of course, knew about these demographic shifts in the Sun Belt and built a coalition including born-again Christians, retirees from northern states, younger suburban migrants, traditional conservatives, and many more. So if the South had traditionally seen a Democratic majority, it begs the question, how did it become more Republican? Well, it all started with this young man, American engineer Willis Carrier. In 1902, the 25-year-old Carrier was brought in by a Brooklyn printing company which was struggling with smearing ink during the humid summer months. To solve the problem, he built a machine that would remove the humidity from the printing room, but something incredible happened. Everyone wanted to suddenly have lunch in the printing room, making a nice side effect of this machine apparent. It was cooling the air. Carrier had accidentally invented air conditioning and started to develop and sell units for commercial uses. His first target, movie theaters. After a successful demonstration of the AC system at Paramount Pictures' new flagship theater, the Rivoli, his invention received traction and expanded into other commercial spaces such as department stores, hotels, office buildings, factories in the 1930s and 1940s. In the late 1940s then, the Carrier Company introduced a game-changing invention into the domestic space. Previously the size of a flatbed truck, they were able to build the first in-window AC unit and prices at an affordable level. This invention set up a massive migration. Places that had been way too hot and too humid now suddenly became tolerable for much larger parts of the population, even in the summer months. For some perspective, the average temperature in July in Phoenix, Arizona is 90 degrees Fahrenheit, while it's 70 degrees in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Milder winters in the Sun Belt also made the region more attractive, with an average temperature of 55 degrees Fahrenheit in Phoenix compared to 10 degrees Fahrenheit in Minneapolis. With those conditions in mind, the post-Civil War area migration of people south to north had been reversed by 1964. The Sun Belt was booming with migrants from colder states as a result of domestic air conditioning. For example, Tucson, Arizona grew from 45,000 people to 210,000 people in just 10 years. Houston, Texas saw a population grow from 600,000 to 940,000 people in the same decade. This migration to the Sun Belt inevitably changed the political map of the United States. Many Northerners who had established the custom to visit the South in the winter months ended up establishing residences after air conditioning made the South habitable all year round. Many of them were well-off Republicans. These numbers by the US Census Bureau demonstrate the growth of residential air conditioning over the years, as well as how all southern states were exceeding the US average percentage of households with air conditioning by 1980. Figures from the National Election Study show that starting in the mid-1950s, a very substantial part of Republicans in the 11 southern states were born outside of these states. They made up half of all Republican voters in 1964 and throughout the 1970s, up to the presidential election of 1980. From the 1960s, this north to south migration fueled by residential air conditioning transformed the South into a region showing greater similarities with the rest of the country, with its younger suburban Republicans and retirees voting based on habits from their places of origin. The migration also was a decisive factor in converting Southern Democrats into Republicans. During the dominance of the Democratic Party in the South, Dixiecrats, or right-wing Democrats, were working with Democrats on the national level. With an increasingly dominant Republican Party in the South, their prospects of winning congressional elections weakened. Coupled with their opposition to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, they defected the Democratic Party and became Republican voters. This surge in residential air conditioning had arguably a large impact on presidential elections. Exploding populations in Florida, Texas, and Southern California shifted the Electoral College toward the Sun Belt, with southern states gaining 29 electoral votes between 1940 and 1980, while the colder states of the Northeast and Rust Belt lost 31. In the first half of the 20th century, only 2 presidents or vice presidents came from Sunbelt states. Starting in 1952, however, every single winning presidential ticket contained a Sunbelt candidate until Barack Obama and Joe Biden broke the streak in 2008. Ronald Reagan choosing George H.W. Bush as his running mate meant that in 1980, candidates for both president and vice president came from the Sun Belt. The significance of the Sun Belt for Reagan's success can be seen in news coverage in the years following Reagan's 1980 election win. For instance, Democrats and Republicans alike complained about a bias to the Sun Belt states in Reagan's budget proposal in 1981. Also, a 1984 article lays out the GOP's concessions to the South, recognizing the Sun Belt's important and Republicans dominating the national political map. Look, there's no question that Ronald Reagan had a lot of qualities that propelled him to be president of the United States, but none of that would have mattered without the North-South migration fueled by air conditioning that shifted Republican voters in his favor. Nonetheless, he was smart to recognize these shifts in demographics and to capitalize on them for his political success. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and enjoy some of our other videos.